It all began on a quiet Saturday afternoon, when Karen decided it was time to gather her family for a special dinner. She wanted to celebrate the arrival of autumn, that time when golden leaves fall like reminders of years gone by. There was something in her heart telling her she needed to reconnect with everyone. But behind her smile, there was a quiet unease. One name echoed in her mind: Margaret, her mother-in-law. Margaret was the kind of woman who, even in silence, filled every space with her presence. Widowed for over 20 years, she was strong, firm, and full of stories that no one else seemed to have the patience to hear. Karen was always kind to her, or at least tried to be. But the truth is, over the years, the small frictions had become invisible barriers. And now, as she wrote her name on the invitation, Karen's heart skipped a beat. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also want to take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot, thank you. Now, you won't believe what happened when Margaret arrived. Karen's husband, John, didn't think his mother should come. He said she caused tension, was never satisfied, and would make everyone uncomfortable. She'll criticize dinner as always, he said, not realizing the weight of his words. But Karen insisted. She's family, John. And that still matters. Inside, however, she doubted it herself. Her children, Emily and Brian, teenagers lost in their own worlds, were equally unenthusiastic about the idea. Is Grandma coming? Oh no, Emily muttered, rolling her eyes. Brian simply said, whatever, without looking up from his phone. The family spirit Karen had dreamed of seemed to vanish before dinner even began. And there were still 2 days to go. Karen spent Sunday carefully preparing every detail. New tablecloth, cloth napkins, sparkling silverware. She wanted everything to be perfect. As if perfection could silence Margaret's judgments. Deep down, she knew that no matter how hard she tried, her mother-in-law's eyes would find something to criticize. And yet, she worked hard. There was something more at play here. Meanwhile, Margaret received the invitation with surprise. She hadn't been invited to dinner at her son's house in almost a year. She read Karen's message more than once. The tone was polite, but impersonal. Still, she smiled. Maybe they're trying to reconnect, she thought. And even with her heart full of doubts, she replied that she would go. The night before dinner, Karen had a strange dream. She was at the table with her whole family, and Margaret, sitting in the center, looked at everyone with tears in her eyes. But no one noticed. In the dream, Margaret got up, walked to the door, and disappeared. Karen woke with a heavy heart. She tried to forget, but something about the dream felt more real than it should have. The big day arrived. The house was spotless, smelling of cinnamon and baked apples. Karen checked her watch every 5 minutes. Her nervousness was palpable. Emily came downstairs complaining about her outfit. Brian was wearing headphones, oblivious to everything. John was irritable, claiming a headache. And the doorbell still hadn't rung. When Margaret's car finally pulled up in front of the house, Karen felt her stomach churn. The woman got out slowly, wearing her favorite lilac dress and holding a walnut cake. She looked fragile, and yet determined. Karen watched from the window, unsure how to react. A mixture of guilt, irritation, and tenderness filled her chest. John opened the door with a curt, "Hi, Mom." Margaret smiled, as if oblivious to the coldness. "What a lovely house, dear," she said to Karen, entering and handing over the cake. "I hope they still like my pecan cake." Karen forced a smile. "Of course, Margaret, thank you." But her mind was already anticipating the criticism to come. Dinner began with an awkward toast. John raised his glass and said, "To the family." No one responded enthusiastically. Margaret sensed the mood but pretended not to notice. She talked about the weather, the new shop downtown, the cake recipe. No one seemed to be listening. Emily checked her phone. Brian tossed food onto his plate. Karen tried to keep the conversation going, but everything seemed to slip through her fingers. Margaret then commented, "This chicken reminds me of what your grandmother used to make, Karen, but hers was a little moister." The comment landed like a stone. Karen swallowed. John frowned, and the tension, already thick, became almost unbearable. Emily let out a muffled chuckle. Brian muttered something no one understood. Karen took a deep breath. "Good to know, Margaret. Next time, you can help me in the kitchen." The sentence came out with a more acidic tone than she intended. Margaret smiled tightly. "With pleasure, dear." But her eyes showed something else: pain. The atmosphere grew heavier. It was as if everyone was pretending this was normal, as if subtly disregarding someone was acceptable. Margaret remained quiet for a while. She watched, as if she were waiting for something, or someone, and then she glanced at her watch, then at the door. A small gesture, but full of meaning. Karen noticed and asked, "Is everything okay, Margaret?" The woman simply replied, "Yes, my dear. Everything is fine." But her voice sounded distant. She adjusted the scarf on her shoulders, looked at Emily and Brian with a sweet smile, and then fixed her eyes on John, as if she wanted to say something. But she fell silent. Time seemed to slow down. At that moment, the doorbell rang, and the sound was like thunder splitting the silence in half. Everyone looked at the door. No one was expecting anyone else. Karen frowned. John rose from his chair hesitantly. Emily put down her cell phone. Brian took off his headphones. Even Margaret stood up, as if she knew exactly who was there. John opened the door and froze. Before him, a middle-aged man, his eyes watering and his hands shaking, held a small suitcase. "Sorry. I know I should have come sooner," he said. Margaret clapped her hands to her mouth. "Oh my God! It's you," she murmured. Karen felt her legs weaken. Emily grabbed her mother's arm. Brian took a step back. No one knew what to think. The silence that fell upon the visitor's arrival was almost deafening. Margaret remained standing, her trembling hands covering her lips, discreet tears streaming down her wrinkled face. The man at the door seemed like a ghost from the past. No one dared move. Karen looked at John, searching for some explanation, but he, too, was in shock. Emily whispered, "Who is he?" Brian, for his part, just stared at the floor. The man took a hesitant step into the house, as if he knew he was carrying a weight. "My name is Samuel. I'm the son Margaret lost 30 years ago." Karen felt the breath leave her lungs. John staggered back, clutching the back of his chair. The floor seemed to be crumbling. Margaret wept silently, as if she had no longer expected to live that moment. "They told me you were dead, Sammy." Her voice was a whisper of despair and relief mixed together. "I thought you didn't want to see me anymore." The man lowered his head. "I tried to come back so many times, but someone always closed the door." And then everything made sense. Karen stared at John and saw the color drain from his face. "John, what is he saying?" she asked in a whisper. John, panicked, tried to formulate a response, but his silence spoke louder. Margaret never took her eyes off her reunited son. And for the first time in a long time, there was something new in that home, a silence that screamed the truth. The set table, once a scene of veiled tensions, now bore witness to a devastating secret. Dinner was growing cold. The wine glasses seemed forgotten. The walnut cake remained untouched. Time had stopped inside that house. Karen sat down slowly, as if carrying the weight of 1,000 questions. Samuel approached his mother cautiously. "I didn't want to cause trouble. I just wanted to see you." Margaret held his hands tightly. "My son, you're here. That's all that matters." Emily and Brian watched without fully understanding, but something inside them told them they were witnessing a sacred moment. A reunion that defied logic. John finally broke the silence. "Samuel, I thought I was protecting Mom." His voice was laced with guilt. "She couldn't handle the truth. Not then." Margaret turned sharply. "You took my son from me, John." The pain in her eyes was like a knife stabbing into his soul. And in that instant, the favorite son became the villain. Karen clapped her hand over her mouth. Everything was upside down. The man she'd admired, her gentle husband, now seemed like a cornered child. "Why, John? How did you dare?" He looked at her, his eyes pleading for understanding. "It was Dad. He asked me. He said Sammy had gotten involved with dangerous people." Samuel confirmed, "I made bad choices, yes. But I wanted to change. And when I tried to come back, someone said you didn't want to see me. I wrote letters, many. But I never got a reply." Margaret sobbed. "I've never seen a letter, my son. Never." It was like watching a mirror shatter in slow motion. And each piece reflected an old pain. Karen got up and went to the door. The cold night wind smacked her face. She needed to breathe. Outside, the dry leaves danced in the wind, as if the world were trying to go on despite the family tragedy. Inside, Margaret tried to piece together her shattered heart. And Samuel just waited for a forgiveness that might never come. Emily approached her grandmother and hugged her instinctively. Margaret cried on her granddaughter's shoulder, as if releasing years of pent-up grief. Brian, silent, watched the man in front of him curiously. "Are you my uncle?" Samuel nodded. "I am. And I've really wanted to meet you. I always have." It was as if they were all waking from a nightmare. Karen went back inside, and for the first time that night, she looked at Margaret with fresh eyes. Not as a demanding mother-in-law, but as a mother who had survived the cruelest loss imaginable. "Margaret, forgive me. I didn't know. If I had known—" The woman squeezed her hand. "You were the one who invited me to this dinner." The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a reflective silence. Everyone was seated except Samuel, who remained standing, hands in his pockets, eyes roving the room. Karen invited him to sit. "Come eat with us, please." He hesitated, but then accepted. It was as if the chair next to Margaret had always been reserved for him. No one said much, but everyone ate. The cold food now seemed to have a different flavor. More human. More real. Margaret held Samuel's hand like a rope to keep from sinking. Emily smiled shyly. Brian even put down his cell phone. Something was changing. And Samuel's presence was like a spark reigniting what seemed dead. John was still silent. His eyes never left his plate. Karen watched him. "You need to speak, John. The truth sets you free." He took a deep breath. "I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of seeing Mom suffer more than she already had with Dad." Margaret looked at him with a mixture of compassion and pain. "But you made me suffer alone." Samuel recounted the years he spent living in Arizona, trying to rebuild his life. He worked as a mechanic, then as a truck driver. "But I always dreamed of going back. Of seeing you again." Margaret caressed his face. "My son, I dreamed of you every night." Emotion filled the room. And no one wanted to interrupt. Karen, watching everything, could feel her heart change. She realized how blinding judgments can be. How much we can hate someone without knowing their pain. And for the first time, she felt ashamed for not having listened to her mother-in-law more carefully. Margaret was more than she seemed. She was a woman who had endured the unimaginable. And now, she was blossoming again. The clock on the wall read 9:42. But no one seemed in a hurry. Samuel laughed with Brian, telling stories of the times he and John used to get up to mischief in their youth. Emily listened intently. Karen brought the walnut cake to the table. Margaret laughed. "Good thing no one cut it, or I would have missed the best part." Everyone smiled. The table was different now. It was the same physically, but emotionally, it had transformed. From a battlefield to an altar of reconciliation. The silence was now complicit, not oppressive. And in the midst of it all, Karen thought, how could we have let this happen for so long? But the answer would come, and it would be surprising. The landline rang, interrupting the lightness of the moment. Karen answered, curious. A female voice on the other end said something that made her freeze. She covered the phone with her hand and looked at Margaret. "It's for you." A woman named Judith. Margaret's eyes widened. "Judith? I haven't heard that name in 40 years. Samuel's eyes widened as well. "Judith. Mom. Do you think it could be?" Margaret placed her hand on her chest. "If it's who I think it is," She knows secrets no one else knows. Karen handed the phone to her mother-in-law. And everyone, once again, lapsed into that familiar silence. But now, with ears perked and hearts in their hands, Margaret lifted the phone to her ear, her voice trembling. "Hello." On the other end, a soft answer. "Hello, Maggie. I heard Samuel is here. We have a lot to talk about." Karen sensed something bigger was about to be revealed. And in that moment, everyone understood that dinner had barely begun. Margaret hung up the phone with trembling hands. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. Karen approached, concerned. "Is everything okay?" The woman merely nodded, but the answer wasn't true. There was something about that connection that reopened old wounds, long before Samuel's disappearance. And suddenly the past seemed to be sitting at the table. Samuel noticed the change too. "Who's Judith, Mom?" Margaret hesitated for a few seconds. "A friend, or rather, a former friend. We had a nasty falling out. She knew things about your father, things that haunt me to this day." Karen felt a chill run down her spine. That dinner had become a chessboard where old pieces were returning to play. Emily and Brian were glued to the conversation, like people watching a live movie. John, however, looked uncomfortable. He crossed his arms, looked away, and bit his lip. Margaret looked at him. "You know something, don't you?" The question was like an arrow shot straight to the chest. He choked. "Mom, it's best to leave this alone." But Karen, her voice firm, answered before her mother-in-law could speak. "No, John. Enough of letting it go. The truth is knocking at the door. And we need to open it." Margaret rested her hand on the table, still holding on to the hope that this reunion wouldn't fall apart. "Judith said she has something to tell me, about your father. And about you." The atmosphere, which had previously seemed calm, grew tense again. Samuel sat back in his chair. "What did my father do, Mother?" Margaret closed her eyes for a few seconds. "I've never told anyone this, Sammy. But one night, shortly before you disappeared, Judith came here crying. She said she'd discovered something serious about your father." Karen squeezed her mother-in-law's hand. "You're not alone." Margaret continued. "She said he had another child. A child born out of wedlock, whom he was secretly supporting. And that you had found out, Sammy. She believed you were pushed away because of it. That someone made a point of erasing you." The room was shocked. John stood up. "This is crazy." His voice trembled. "Father would never do that. And you know very well that Judith has always been unstable." Margaret looked at him as if seeing her own past resurface. "You always defended him, John. Even when he yelled, even when he humiliated me. Did you think that was a father's love?" Karen looked at her husband with a mixture of sadness and curiosity. "John, you never talked about your childhood. Why?" He lowered his head. "Because it wasn't a pretty thing to remember. Dad was strict. But I thought that was normal." Margaret interrupted. "Severity is one thing. Cruelty is another. And your father crossed that line many times." Samuel, visibly shaken, stood up. "If I disappeared because of something I discovered, I need to remember. I need to search for those memories." Karen asked, "Don't you remember everything?" He shook his head. "Some parts are blurry. It's like someone erased pieces of my history." And then, a new layer of mystery emerged. Emily, curious, asked, "Does this Judith woman know who this secret son is?" Margaret nodded. "I tried to ask, but she said she'd only tell me in person, and that she'd wait for me tomorrow at the old coffee shop where we used to work." Karen took a deep breath. "Then you're going?" Margaret nodded. "I have to go." Dinner was silent. But now, it wasn't awkward. It was expectant. As if everyone knew they were about to discover something big. Karen watched the dynamic between John and Margaret. She noticed the exchanged glances, the calculated pauses, the barbs hidden in subtle phrases. There was something unspoken between them. And it was about to come to light. John cut a piece of cake. "I'm glad the cake turned out well." Margaret replied with a sweet smile. "Oh, now it's good." Everyone got the dig. Karen tried to change the subject. "Samuel, would you like more wine?" He thanked her and joked, "I don't usually drink with such elegant people." Emily laughed. "I think you're the most elegant one at the table today." But the light-hearted atmosphere was short-lived. John blurted out, without thinking, "If you were that elegant, you wouldn't have run away from home." The silence fell like a bomb. Margaret looked up. "You have no right to say that." Karen touched her husband's arm. "John." But he was already on his feet, his face flushed. "Sorry. You were stronger than I was." Samuel stared at his brother. "You still hate me, don't you?" John sighed. I just always thought you were the favorite. Mommy's darling. The adventurous one. The one who could make mistakes. And me. I had to be the good one. The one who stayed. The one who cleaned up the mess." Margaret fell silent. The words weighed more than any scream. Karen saw the root of the pain. It wasn't about dinner. Or her mother-in-law. It was about two hurt children competing for scraps of affection. She said, "You were both hurt by the same father, and now you need to stop hurting each other." John wiped his eyes, and for the first time, Margaret stood and hugged him. "I was wrong, John. I'm sorry." Samuel also approached. "Maybe we all made mistakes." The emotion was so intense that even Emily was crying, hiding behind a napkin. Brian held his grandmother's hand, as if protecting a fragile flower from the wind. Dinner, the same one that had begun tensely, was now a stage for reconciliation, and for revelations yet to come. Karen tidied the kitchen while everyone chatted. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful. But as she opened the cupboard to put away the glasses, something fell from above, an old box, covered in dust. Inside, old letters, with stamps and familiar handwriting. She picked up one of the letters and read the sender's name. Her heart skipped a beat. "Samuel." She brought the letters to Margaret. "Are they yours?" The woman took them with trembling hands. "My God, these are the letters he wrote to me." Karen looked at John. He was pale. "Did you know about this?" He shook his head. "No. I swear I don't. I've never seen this box before." But Margaret didn't believe it. Her eyes said something else. Karen, trying to soothe, said, "Maybe someone hid it. Maybe it was your father." Margaret began to cry again. "How many nights I spent thinking my son hated me, and here he was, writing to me. I would have done everything differently if I'd known." Samuel hugged her. "We're here now, Mom, and that's what matters." But deep down, Karen knew there was more. More secrets. More unspoken words. And Judith, the mysterious woman on the phone, was the key to it all. What did she know? Why now, after so many years, had she decided to reappear? And most importantly, what else was hidden in that house full of memories? While everyone slept that night, Karen lay awake. She sat on the couch, staring into the unlit fireplace. She thought about how a simple dinner had revealed so many wounds, and how God sometimes uses chaos to rebuild love. She prayed silently. "Lord, guide our steps. Reveal the truth, and give us the strength to forgive." The next morning, Margaret woke early. She dressed elegantly and packed her bag. She was determined. "Today I'm going to face the past head-on." Karen would accompany her. Samuel would too. John stayed home with the children, still processing everything. And when the three figures left the house for the coffee shop, they knew something big was about to happen. What no one imagined was that, upon arriving at the cafe, waiting for them wasn't just Judith, but someone else. Someone Margaret hadn't seen in almost 50 years. And someone she carried with her. The final missing piece of the puzzle. The cafe was the same as it had been decades ago, though time had taken its toll. The walls, once white, now had an aged tone, as if hiding ancient secrets in every crack. Margaret entered with slow but steady steps. Karen at her side, Samuel close behind. They were about to face a truth that could change everything. Judith sat at the last table in the room, her back to the entrance. She wore a brown hat and held a cup in both hands. Margaret recognized the way she crossed her fingers. Nothing had changed. When she turned and saw her, Judith smiled, but her eyes didn't follow. It was a smile filled with pain, guilt, and something else, secrets. You really came, Maggie. Her voice was hoarse, tired. Margaret sat down, Karen beside her. Samuel remained standing, suspicious. Judith, why now? The woman took a deep breath. Because I'm sick. And because I can't carry this weight to the grave. I need to tell you what happened to your son. To your husband. To me. Silence fell like a thick fog. Margaret held the cup in front of her but didn't drink. Just say it, Judith. My heart has been through more than it should. The woman nodded. Your husband, Charles, he was having an affair with me. Karen clapped her hand over her mouth. Samuel froze. But Margaret just closed her eyes. I already knew. Judith continued, what you don't know is that I got pregnant with him. Karen gasped. Samuel looked at Margaret, waiting for a reaction. The woman remained silent, but her hands trembled slightly. And this son, Maggie, he wasn't abandoned. He was given to your family and raised as one of your own. Karen frowned. What? Samuel stepped forward. What are you talking about? Judith looked straight at Margaret. Your son, Maggie, Charles's other son, is John. The table fell silent. Karen felt a chill run down her spine. Samuel recoiled. That can't be true. Judith nodded. Charles forced me to hand the baby over to his wife, and she raised him as her own. For a moment, Margaret didn't know if she was awake or dreaming. Are you saying that John isn't my biological son? Judith shook her head slowly. He's mine. And Charles's. But he always called you mother. You were more of a mother than I could ever be. Margaret brought her hands to her face. My God! Samuel sat down. He needed something to hold on to. So, we're both children of the same father, but different mothers. Karen tried to process. That explains a lot. The behaviors, the conflicts, Charles's overprotectiveness of John, Margaret murmured, and the contempt for me when he discovered the betrayal. Judith placed a letter on the table. Charles wrote this shortly before he died. He wanted you to know, but he never had the courage to deliver it. Margaret took the letter with trembling fingers. She opened it slowly. It was his handwriting. A confession, an apology, and a revelation. She began to cry. He made me think I was crazy. Karen took her mother-in-law's hand. You are a much stronger woman than all of us. Samuel stood. John needs to know this. Margaret wiped away her tears. He will know. But in my way. In my time. Judith, her voice breaking, said, Forgive me, Maggie. I was weak. Selfish. But my heart never forgot you. Margaret took a deep breath. I forgive you, Judith. Because if I don't, this pain will swallow me whole. The woman burst into tears. Thank you. I can leave in peace. Karen was overcome with emotion. Samuel hugged her tightly. And for the first time, Margaret got up from the table feeling a little lighter. But there was still something to be done. Back home, Margaret was greeted by John with a tight smile. How was the trip? She simply replied, We need to talk. They sat at the table. Karen and Samuel watched from afar. Margaret took the letter. Your father left this for me, but I think you're the one who needs to read it. He read it, and as he read, his expression changed. That's a lie, he murmured. That can't be true. Margaret placed her hand over his. John, the blood may come from another woman, but the love I gave you was real. He began to cry. I've felt out of place my whole life, like I never belonged. Now it all makes sense. Karen stepped closer. You're part of this family, John. Always have been. Samuel also approached. He extended his hand to his brother. Maybe now we can really begin. John hesitated, and then squeezed his hand. It was a strong, sincere squeeze. Karen took a deep breath. The truth hurts, but it sets you free. Margaret nodded. And the truth chose us tonight. But then, in the midst of their reconciliation, John said something no one expected. "If I'm Judith's son, then that means Dad's will is no longer valid." Karen frowned. "What do you mean?" He replied, "He left everything to me, because he thought I was the only heir. But now, everything could change." Margaret looked at him with disappointment. "Is that what worries you, John? The money?" He looked away. "That's easy for you to say. You weren't adopted by mistake. You haven't lived with that confusion inside your chest." Samuel stared at him. "And that justifies trying to take everything from our mother." His tone was harsh. The tension returned. The table became a battleground again. Karen intervened. "Stop, both of you. This isn't about inheritance. It's about love, forgiveness, reconciliation." Margaret, tears in her eyes, said, "I raised you as my own, John. I gave you my all. And now you throw this in my face." He fell silent. He seemed remorseful. But the comment had already hurt. And the wound was deep. Emily, who had been listening from the stairs, ran to her grandmother. "Grandma, you're my only grandmother. I love you." Margaret hugged her tightly. "Thank you, dear. True love. This is it." Brian joined in the embrace. Karen looked at John and saw a man torn between remorse and greed. His internal war was far from over. Later, alone with Karen, Margaret said, "You know, honey, when the Bible says the truth will set us free, it doesn't lie. But what no one tells you is that before it sets us free, the truth shatters." Karen took her hand. "But God also rebuilds, brick by brick, soul by soul." Margaret smiled. "And maybe that's starting now." The next morning, everyone woke in silence. John left early, without saying where he was going. Margaret sat on the porch, watching the sunrise. Samuel brought coffee. Karen sat next to her. "And now," Margaret smiled, "now we wait and trust." But at that very moment, the doorbell rang. And as she opened the door, Karen saw something that would change everything again. The doorbell seemed to echo differently that morning. It wasn't just another ring, it was like a call. Karen opened the door slowly, still processing everything that had happened in the previous days. And there, standing on the porch with an envelope in his hands, was a gray-haired man with sunglasses, his expression serious. "Good morning. I'm looking for Margaret Evans." Karen hesitated for a moment. "She's here. Can I help you?" The man smiled, but there was something strange about it. "My name is Alan McCarthy. I was the late Charles Evans's attorney. I need to speak with Mrs. Margaret personally. It's about the will." Karen swallowed. "Will?" He nodded. There was a new clause. Hidden. Margaret appeared in the doorway, elegant in her pale blue dress. "I'm Margaret Evans. Please come in." Alan strode in, his shoes echoing on the living room's hardwood floor. He placed his briefcase on the dining table and began unpacking papers. Karen called Samuel, who quickly joined them. Emily and Brian watched curiously from the stairs. "I'll be blunt, Mrs. Evans," Alan began. "During the probate proceedings, something caught our attention. A letter, dated March 22, 1999, signed by Charles Evans, requesting the inclusion of a codicil, an additional clause to the original will." Margaret frowned. "And what did that clause say?" Alan pushed up his glasses and read, "If it is discovered that John Evans is not Margaret Evans's biological son, but rather the product of an extramarital affair, all assets inherited by him must be frozen until further judicial review. The direct heir will become the firstborn, Samuel Evans, if he returns." Karen was shocked. Samuel leaned against the wall. This is real." Alan nodded. "It's been notarized. The clause is valid. The problem is, no one knew you were still alive." Margaret looked at the lawyer with tears in her eyes. "Charles hid this until the end. Even your guilt. He locked it in an envelope." Alan nodded silently. Karen rose from her chair. "This changes everything," but Margaret interrupted her. "No, it doesn't. Because what's at stake here isn't just money, it's honor. It's family." She looked at Samuel. You may be the heir on paper, but you need to think with your heart. He nodded. I don't want an inheritance. I just want to rebuild the family I lost. But, midway through the conversation, a second surprise. Alan pulled another envelope from his briefcase. There's one more letter, and this one was written to be delivered only if Samuel returned alive. Margaret took the letter. Her hands trembled. She opened it slowly. The handwriting was clear, recognizable. Charles. Once again, the past was walking through the front door. The letter said, Samuel, if you ever return, know that I never stopped thinking about you. My mistake was pride, the fear of losing control, and that fear destroyed our home. Your brother is not to blame. Margaret, she was more faithful than I deserved. If you can forgive me, do it not for me, but for yourself. With regret. Your father. Samuel read silently, his eyes filling with tears. Karen was crying. Margaret held a white handkerchief to her face. The lawyer respected the silence and gathered up the papers. I'll leave a copy with you. The decision is now in the family's hands. And before leaving, he said something no one expected. Oh, I almost forgot. There's one more detail. Everyone stared at him. Charles kept a personal account in another state, in Oregon, and he left instructions that it could only be accessed by someone with the password Bethlehem. Margaret's eyes widened. Bethlehem was where we spent our honeymoon. No one else knew about it. Karen whispered, Maybe there's something there. Alan thanked her and left. Silence returned to the room, but it wasn't the same. It was a silence that held decisions. Margaret stood firmly. I don't want the will to destroy what's left of our family. Samuel hugged her. And I won't let that happen, Mom. Karen watched, grateful to see, for the first time, real unity. Late in the afternoon, John returned. He was visibly dejected. I received a notice from the bank. My account has been frozen. Margaret nodded. We need to talk. They sat in the backyard, under the shade of an ancient tree. Karen served iced tea. It was a serene scene, but what came next shattered that peace completely. John heard everything. About the lawyer, the will, the clause, the letter. He was silent the whole time. Finally, he blurted out, So that's it. I've lost everything. Margaret replied firmly, No. You've only lost what never truly belonged to you. But you can still get back what matters most. He looked at her, confused. What? And she replied, Our trust. Karen held his hand. We still love you, John. But you need to prove you love us too. Not with words. With actions. He cried. For the first time, sincerely. Samuel stood and held out his hand. Let's rebuild this. Together. And there, under that tree, the impossible began to happen. Forgiveness. That evening, the family sat down at the table again. No frills, no pretense. Just a simple dinner of homemade lasagna and lemonade. Margaret thanked God in prayer, everyone holding hands. Lord, thank you for the truth. Even when it hurts. Thank you for Samuel. For John. For this new chance. And the tears flowed freely. Karen smiled. Emily and Brian chatted among themselves like never before. Samuel laughed. John was quieter, but present. Margaret watched everything with a peaceful look. But deep down, she knew, there was still something in Oregon. Something stored in that account. Something that could close this cycle, or open it once and for all. And then, at the end of dinner, she said, Samuel, will you come with me? He nodded. Karen nodded too. Oregon awaits us. And perhaps, the last truth too. Margaret raised her glass. To the courage to begin again. They all toasted. And that night, they slept peacefully. But the trip to Oregon would bring more than they bargained for. The road to Oregon was long and silent. Margaret, Samuel, and Karen were in a rental car, GPS marking the route and hearts marking the time. Each turn seemed to bring up more memories, more questions. What could be hidden in a long-forgotten personal account? And why had Charles chosen to keep it a secret? They arrived in the small town of Ashland at dusk. A quiet place, surrounded by golden trees and mountains in the background. The local bank was discreet, almost invisible among the businesses on the main street. Margaret got out of the car with firm steps. "Whatever it is, I'm ready." Samuel held the door for her. Karen squeezed his hand. The bank manager greeted them cordially. "Mrs. Evans, correct? We have an account linked to your late husband's name. It will only be accessible with the security password." Margaret took a deep breath and said, "Bethlehem." The manager smiled, typed it into the system, and after a few seconds, murmured, "Perfect. One moment, please." He returned with a small safe, made of dark wood, weathered with age. He placed it on the table. This was kept in Mr. Charles Evans's personal safe, and instructed to be delivered only to Mrs. Margaret. She thanked him and opened the box with careful hands. Inside were 3 items: an envelope, an old photo, and a recording. Karen picked up the photo. It was of Charles, still young, with a baby in his arms. On the back was an inscription, "To the son I never recognized, and to the woman who suffered in silence." Margaret took out the envelope and read the letter aloud. Her voice trembled, but it was firm. It was a confession of regret, and a plea for redemption that came too late. "Margaret, if you're reading this, it's because the truth has found its way. Forgive me for everything I hid. For lying. For sharing our home with secrets that hurt you. John never knew where he came from. Samuel paid for mistakes that weren't his. And you deserved the truth. I always loved you, even when I was weak. Charles." Margaret wept silently. Samuel held her shoulder. Karen looked at the cassette recording. "And this," the manager explained, "we have a proper tape recorder. If you'd like to listen to it now." Margaret nodded. They were led to a private room. The technician turned on the device and pressed play. The voice that came out changed everything. It was Charles. His voice was tired but clear. "If my family ever hears this, know that I destroyed more than I built. Judith loved me, yes, but I never stopped loving Margaret. I was afraid of Samuel, afraid of seeing him grow stronger than me. And so I did everything to push him away, including lying to John and manipulating him." The recording continued. "The money, the properties, all of this was my form of control. But what weighs most heavily on me is having silenced Margaret. She knew. She always knew. And yet, she silently forgave me. My greatest punishment was seeing her continue to be the light, while I sank into the shadows." Karen wept. Samuel closed his eyes. Margaret, at peace, listened to everything. "If any of you have the courage, rebuild this family. Not for my name, but for the love that remains. I know it exists, because I saw it in Margaret. Every day." The sound ended. The silence that followed was reverent. Margaret closed her eyes for a few seconds. "May God have mercy on him." Outside the bank, the world seemed the same. But inside, everything had changed. Samuel looked at his mother. "Dad was a broken man," Margaret replied, "and yet God allowed the truth to come out. Because he doesn't abandon his own, even when all seems lost." Karen nodded. "The truth saved you." At the hotel where they spent the night, Karen sat with Samuel on the porch. "How are you?" He shrugged. "Confused, but whole." She smiled. "You have the chance to be the bridge, to bring the pieces of this story together with love." He took a deep breath. "I'll do it, Karen. For her. And for me." In the next room, Margaret slept soundly for the first time in years. The next day, before heading back, they visited the small local church. Margaret lit a candle and said a silent prayer. "Lord, thank you for not letting me die without knowing the whole truth. Give me wisdom to use it compassionately." Samuel knelt beside her. Karen did too. And for a moment, there was no pain. Only gratitude. Back in town, they found John waiting on the porch. He saw them coming and ran to the car. "Did you find anything?" Margaret nodded. "We found everything." They went inside together. They sat down at the table again. And for the first time, Margaret opened the box in front of everyone. John heard everything. He saw everything. And at the end, he burst into tears. I felt deceived my whole life, and now I know it was all a mistake. Margaret approached him. You are my son, not because I gave you birth, but because God placed you in my arms. He hugged her, crying, asking for forgiveness, and she forgave him. Samuel hugged him too. 3 sons, 3 stories, 1 mother. Emily and Brian were there too, silent but moved, watching the family's strength restored. Karen held Margaret's hand. You won, Margaret. The truth came, and brought light. The woman smiled. It wasn't me. It was God. But just when everything seemed resolved, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just one sentence. Not everything has been revealed. Karen opened the envelope. It was an old photo. John as a baby, in the arms of a woman who wasn't Judith. On the back a note. Look for Eleanor. She knows the truth. Margaret felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Who is Eleanor? Samuel was silent for a moment. I think she was a nurse at the hospital where John was born. John's eyes widened. Are you saying that maybe Judith isn't even my mother? The atmosphere, once again, plunged into tension. Margaret took the photo with steady hands. Then we'll find out. Because this family can't bear to live with lies anymore. Karen agreed. The time has come for the final revelation. And there, another cycle began. The next morning brought a new sense of unease. Margaret held the photo she'd received the day before with a mixture of fear and determination. The woman beside the baby was definitely not Judith. And now, a new character entered the story, Eleanor. Karen served coffee to everyone, trying to keep the peace. But the atmosphere was tense. We'll look for this woman today, Margaret said firmly. Samuel had been on the computer since early. I found a record of an Eleanor McNeil. She was an obstetric nurse in Dallas in the 1980s. She apparently retired about 12 years ago and now lives in a nursing home called Sunrise Haven, not far from here. Margaret stood. Let's go there. Enough questions. John hesitated. What if I don't want to know? Karen looked at him gently. John, you've spent your whole life full of questions that no one has answered. Maybe today is the day you find peace. He lowered his eyes. What if I don't like the answer? Margaret touched his hand. God never reveals something to destroy us. He reveals it to set us free. John nodded. He was ready. Or at least, he would try to be. They arrived at the nursing home late in the morning. The place was welcoming, surrounded by well-kept gardens and soft music playing in the hallways. The receptionist was kind. Eleanor McNeil. Yes, she lives here. She's in the reading courtyard. But she doesn't usually receive visitors. Margaret smiled. Perhaps today she should make an exception. They walked the halls in silence. And there she was. A white-haired, attentive-looking woman sitting in a rocking chair, a red-covered book in her hands. When she saw Margaret, the book slipped from her fingers. You. Margaret Evans. Her voice was a surprised whisper. Margaret stepped closer, firm. You know me. Eleanor nodded. I held your son. John swallowed. Do you know who I am? Eleanor looked at him, her eyes welling up. Yes. And no. Karen stepped forward. That picture. It's you with that baby, isn't it? She looked at the image fondly. Yes. That picture was taken at the hospital. The day a switch happened. A switch that haunts me to this day. The world seemed to spin upside down. Margaret sat up. Switch. Eleanor nodded. That day, 2 women gave birth at the same time. One was you. The other was a young woman named Teresa. Both had sons. And by mistake, or perhaps by orders from above, the babies were switched. John staggered. Are you saying that I might not be your son, or Judith's? Eleanor wept. Judith was part of the plan. She was hired by Charles to pretend to be the biological mother in case the truth came out. He needed control. And over time, everything got mixed up. John's real biological mother was Teresa, a humble woman who never knew her son was raised in another home. The silence fell like a stone. Samuel stood. So, where is this woman now? Eleanor hesitated. Teresa passed away 10 years ago. She lived in Arkansas. I never knew the truth. But she left a letter, which she gave to me before she died. She said she felt, deep in her heart, that her baby had been taken from her. Karen was shocked. Margaret was devastated. John was white as a sheet. So I'm the son of a stranger. Eleanor took his hand. You're the son of a woman who would love you with everything she had, if she'd had the chance. Margaret came closer and hugged him. And even without knowing it, I loved you, as if you were my own, because God placed you in my arms, and in my heart. Emotion filled the room. Karen watched everything as if she were in a movie. And Charles knew. Eleanor nodded. He knew everything. He was the one who authorized the exchange. Why? I never understood. Maybe to protect Samuel. Maybe to punish Margaret. Maybe out of pure ego. Samuel clenched his fists. He destroyed us all. John wept. And now, who am I? Margaret cupped his face. You are my son. Blood doesn't matter. God chose you for me. And I would choose you 1,000 times over, even knowing everything. Karen knelt beside him. You are more than the origin. You are the path. A new beginning. Samuel came closer and hugged him. We will get through this together. Eleanor pulled a yellowed letter from her purse. This was from Teresa. It said, if my son ever learns the truth, tell him I forgive him. That I've always missed him, even without knowing why. And that he is loved, even without ever having met me. John held the letter like a piece of his soul. He cried like a child. On the way home, the car was silent. A heavy but necessary silence. Margaret thought about how much she had been deceived, but also how much she had won. Samuel looked out the window, reflecting on how God, in his infinite justice, had laid everything bare. And John just took a deep breath, trying to rebuild himself. When they arrived home, Emily and Brian were waiting for them. Margaret gathered them together. She told them everything, without hiding anything. Emily cried, You're my father, no matter where you came from. Brian hugged him back. John smiled, for the first time in days. Maybe I'm learning what true love is. Karen hugged him tightly. Love is the only bond that time doesn't erase. Later, alone in her room, Margaret read Charles's letter again. But this time, not with anger. With mercy. He was a lost man. And yet, he was an instrument that allowed me to know the love that doesn't depend on blood ties. She looked to the heavens and prayed. Lord, thank you. Because when all seemed lost, you showed me there was still a purpose. At dinner, the table was fuller than ever. Full of stories. Full of truth. Full of love. Samuel, John, Karen, Emily, Brian, all together. Like never before. Margaret raised her glass. To the masks that have fallen. Because only then could we see the real faces. The real hearts. And everyone toasted. But no one imagined there was still more. That night, while washing dishes, Karen received a call. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. On the other end, a firm, female voice. Good evening. My name is Sarah, and I believe I'm John's sister. The plate slipped from Karen's hands, falling to the floor and shattering into pieces. Karen froze, the phone still to her ear. The voice on the other end repeated, Hello? Are you still there? She answered, swallowing hard. Yes. You said you're John's sister? The woman nodded. I'm Sarah. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. My mother's name was Teresa. Before she died, she told me she'd had a son, but he was taken from her. Karen closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Oh my God, it's all true. Sarah continued, "For years I thought it was just a sick woman's ravings. But after I found her letter, I started looking. And yesterday, a woman named Eleanor called me. She said my brother had discovered the truth. The connection was real." Margaret, who had entered the kitchen unnoticed, heard the last words and placed her hand over her heart. "She has a daughter." Teresa had a daughter. Karen handed her the phone. "Talk to her, Margaret." The elderly woman's voice trembled, but it was firm. "Sarah, my name is Margaret Evans. I raised John as my son. And today, I welcome you as part of our family." Sarah was silent. Then, her voice breaking, she replied, "You don't know how much this means to me." Margaret smiled. "You're welcome here. Any time. We're all learning to rebuild." And before hanging up, Sarah said something no one expected. "I'm not alone. I have a daughter. She really wants to meet her uncle." Karen hung up the phone in shock. "John, he's an uncle." Margaret sat up slowly, her eyes filling with tears. Time tried to erase everything, but God, in His infinite justice, decided to bring it all back. Samuel entered the kitchen, curious. "What's going on?" Margaret looked at him with a sweet smile. "You've gained a niece." John, who had been listening from the stairs, came down silently. "Is it true?" "I have a sister." Margaret stood and hugged him. "Yes, and a niece." He cried. But this time, they were tears of hope. "So Teresa hasn't forgotten me." Karen replied firmly, "She loved you until the end, even without knowing where you were." The next day, Sarah arrived. A simple woman with brown eyes and a calm voice. She brought with her a girl of about 10, named Lily. John froze when he saw them. Sarah approached slowly. "John." He nodded. "I'm your sister." They embraced as if time stood still. Margaret watched from afar, her heart full. Lily ran to him. "Are you my uncle?" John knelt down and hugged her tightly. "Yes, I am, dear." Karen cried. Emily and Brian were also present. Sarah, looking around, said, "It's like I've stepped into a story that only existed in dreams." Margaret replied sweetly, "But now it's real. And it's just beginning." During lunch, Sarah shared more about Teresa. "Mom was sweet, hard-working. She raised me alone. She always said there was a piece missing from our family, and now I understand why." Margaret shared as well. "I felt the same way, like something was off." The connection between them was palpable, and it touched everyone. After lunch, Sarah handed John something. An antique necklace with a blue stone. "It belonged to our mother. She asked me to give it to my brother, if I ever found him." John held the necklace with emotion. "I will honor her. And you too." Margaret hugged him. "God is restoring everything, even what seemed impossible." That evening, everyone sat in the backyard. The starry sky seemed to approve of this reunion. Margaret spoke softly. "You know what amazes me most? How the past finds us, even when we think it's buried." Karen agreed. "And God always finds a way to reveal what needs to be revealed." Samuel said thoughtfully, "For years, Father hid the truth. But no lie stands forever." Sarah added, "And no truth comes late. It comes at the right time. When we're ready." Margaret looked up at the sky. "Or when we need it most." In the following days, the house filled with life. Lily played with Emily and Brian. John and Sarah gradually got to know each other. Samuel helped Margaret organize old letters. Karen documented everything, as if knowing this story would still reach many hearts. It was as if God were writing a new chapter. But one Sunday afternoon, something unexpected happened. A man knocked on the door. He was dressed simply and seemed nervous. "I'm looking for Margaret Evans." Karen answered. "She is. May I ask why?" He replied, "I'm David, Judith's son. I don't think my mother told me everything before she died." Karen's eyes widened. "Wait here." Margaret greeted him calmly. "Are you Judith's son?" He nodded. "She passed away last week." But before she left, She left a box for me. She said it should be given only to you." Margaret shivered. "Can I have it, please?" He handed her the box and said goodbye. "I hope you find what you're looking for. My mother had many regrets." In the box was a diary. Judith recounted everything. The secret meetings with Charles. The truth about the baby switch. But there was more. She revealed that Charles didn't act alone. A nurse was bribed. And a third person helped, Charles's sister. Margaret was shocked. He had accomplices. The lie was bigger than I imagined. Karen read everything carefully. This story still has loose ends. Margaret closed the diary. We may never know everything. But we already know enough to forgive and start over. Samuel nodded. Evil tried to destroy this family. But the truth rebuilt us. And there, another piece of the past fell into place. That night, while everyone slept, Margaret stood alone on the porch. He was looking up at the sky, his eyes shining. She prayed silently, "Lord, thank you. Because even in the midst of pain, you wrote a new story. Thank you for every truth, every tear, and for every person who came this far." And she felt peace. The kind that only comes from above. But the next morning, the phone rang again. It was a male voice. "Mrs. Evans, we found something in the hospital files." A document signed by Charles, requesting not only the switching of babies, but the disappearance of records. Margaret's eyes widened. That means there's someone else involved. The past hadn't finished unfolding yet. Margaret walked silently down the hallway, clutching her phone tightly. The hospital's revelation still throbbed in her mind. Request to erase official records. The words wouldn't leave her head. Charles had gone further than anyone imagined. But Margaret was no longer the same woman she'd been before. Now, she was ready to face it all, with dignity. Karen found her sitting on the living room sofa, holding Judith's diary with a serene expression. "Are you going to do something with this information?" Margaret looked at her and calmly replied, "I will forgive." Karen frowned. "Even after everything?" Margaret nodded. "Evil has already taken too much from me. It won't take my peace too." Samuel entered the room and overheard the conversation. "Will you even forgive Charles's sister? She was complicit in the exchange, and she still lives in the same town." Margaret looked at him tenderly. "I'll go find her. Not to demand payment, but to free my heart." Karen touched his shoulder. "That's more than noble. It's divine." Margaret smiled. "It's what Jesus would do." The next day, she went to the house of Eleanor White, Charles's sister. She rang the doorbell with a firm heart. The woman opened the door and froze when she saw her. "Margaret!" The elderly woman took a deep breath. "Can we talk?" Eleanor hesitated, but opened the door. "Come in." The two sat on the porch, as if time had stopped to watch. "If you came here to confront me—" "I understand," Eleanor said, her eyes downcast. Margaret shook her head. "No. I came to tell you I forgive you." Eleanor was silent for a few seconds. Then she began to cry. "He manipulated me, Margaret. He said it was to protect you, to protect the family's image. I believed him." Margaret took her hand. "You were used by him, just like all of us. But God used even that to bring light." Eleanor sobbed. "I've always admired you, you know, even though I didn't deserve your friendship. And every night, I prayed to God that one day, you would be able to look at me without resentment." Margaret smiled. "So he answered your prayer today." Back home, Karen made tea for everyone. Sarah and Lily were there too. John, now calmer, helped organize the photo albums. Samuel cleaned up all the old letters. And Margaret made decisions. She gathered everyone in the living room. "I want to talk to you about what I'll do with Charles's inheritance." Everyone fell silent. Margaret stood, holding a folder. "I've decided to donate half of everything to a project supporting single mothers. Women like Teresa, who raised their children with courage, even in the face of abandonment." Karen placed her hand on her heart. That's beautiful. Margaret continued, the other half will be divided among you. All of you. John's eyes widened. Even me. Margaret nodded. You're my son. It doesn't matter how you came to me. Sarah tried to refuse. Margaret, I don't. But Margaret interrupted. You're Teresa's daughter. And Teresa is part of our history. And Lily is the future of our family. Samuel smiled proudly. You've always been the noblest among us. On Sunday, the family went to church. Margaret asked to give a short testimony. He stepped up to the pulpit with firm steps, holding the Bible. Beloved, for many years, I lived surrounded by lies. But the truth came. It hurt. It destroyed. And then, it healed. Because God doesn't reveal to hurt. He reveals to restore. The church was silent. She continued, my husband made a mistake. He cheated on me. He deceived me. But the Lord taught me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about not letting pain control us anymore. Karen wept. John did too. Samuel held the bench tightly. I forgave my husband. I forgave his sister. And today, I forgive myself for not listening to my intuition sooner. At the end, the church gave her a standing ovation. The pastor approached and said, Sister Margaret, your story is a living message of the gospel. May God continue to use your life. She walked down the aisle with tears in her eyes. But it was different this time. It was deliverance. It was healing. It was a new beginning. And everyone knew something new had been born there. The following week, Margaret created a support group for women hurt by lies, abandonment, and the pain of silence. Karen helped her organize the meetings. Sarah shared her story. And many women began to show up. Similar stories. Hidden scars. Margaret welcomed them as a mother. As a woman. As a daughter of God. One afternoon, during a group meeting, a woman entered silently. She sat in the back, without saying a word. When Margaret approached, she was crying softly. May I have a hug? Margaret asked. The woman nodded. In the embrace, she said, my daughter was taken from me 30 years ago. And only now am I ready to speak. Margaret closed her eyes and thanked God. Every pain she had felt, now transformed into relief for others. She finally understood that her mission went beyond her own pain. It was about transforming scars into bridges, tears into testimonies, truths into liberation. Karen wrote everything down to document and expand the project. John, now more serene, began therapy. With Samuel's help, he began to piece together a timeline of his own life. I want to leave something for Lily. Let her know where she comes from, and where she can go. Margaret helped with the details. Sarah proudly said, I never thought you'd be so present, such a brother. At one of the group meetings, Margaret told her full story for the first time, from beginning to end. When she finished, a woman hugged her and said, You gave me the strength to search for my son, whom I haven't seen in 25 years. Margaret held her hand. Search. Love is always worth the try. The woman smiled. You gave me back my faith. Later, Karen said, You became a beacon, Margaret. Her mother-in-law replied, It wasn't me. It was God. I just let His light shine through me. And there, amidst old letters, new hugs, and many revealed truths, the family rose again. But something still awaited them. One last piece of the past was about to arrive in the mail. It was a peaceful afternoon, with clear skies and the sound of birds in the backyard. Margaret was drinking tea with Lily on the porch, while Karen was organizing the papers for the community project. Samuel and John were in the garden, exchanging laughs, a rarity in the past, but increasingly common now. It seemed that peace had finally settled in the house. It seemed, until the postman arrived. He left a thick, return delivery envelope. The handwriting was old, almost illegible, and simply said, To Margaret Evans, deliver in person. Karen took the envelope and brought it to her mother-in-law. Margaret examined it for a few seconds. Something about the smell of the paper made her shiver. She opened it carefully. And there was something no one expected. It was a handwritten letter, on delicate, aged paper. Beside, it was a copy of a genetic test. Margaret read the first line aloud. "Dear Margaret, if you're reading this, it's because time has done what I couldn't, tell you the truth." She frowned. The signature at the bottom, Charles. Samuel stepped onto the porch beside John. "Mom, is everything okay?" She looked at them, her eyes welling up. "I think we found the last piece." And then, her voice trembling, she continued reading. Charles confessed something he had omitted even in the recording, that he had a third child, the result of a brief affair during a business trip, and that this child had been given up for adoption. Karen approached. "Another son?" Margaret nodded. He didn't know his mother's name, or where the child ended up. He only learned, years later, that the woman had died, and that the boy had been adopted by a family in Oklahoma. She held the DNA test in her hand. "This test is from someone who was searching for his origins, and discovered he was the son of Charles Evans." Samuel sat down slowly. John stood silently. Margaret opened the second envelope, which came with the letter. There was a photo, a tall man with kind eyes and a sincere smile. And a short letter, "My name is Ethan. I recently discovered who my biological father was. I never wanted money, just answers. And maybe a place to belong." Karen read aloud as everyone listened, barely breathing. "I always knew there was something about me that didn't fit. My adoptive parents were wonderful, but something kept pulling me back. When I found out my father was Charles Evans, I didn't know what to do. So I wrote this letter, hoping for a miracle." Margaret held the photo tenderly. "He's handsome. He has Charles's eyes." John smirked. "And he looks like Samuel, too." Lily took the photo and asked, "Will he come?" Karen replied, "We don't know, dear, but I think we should invite him." And so they did. They wrote a simple, heartfelt letter, inviting Ethan to meet their new family. 2 weeks later, a black car pulled up in front of the house. Ethan got out with a small bouquet of flowers in his hands. He was nervous, visibly emotional. Margaret opened the door, and seeing him felt like time had stopped again. She hugged him tightly, without saying a word. He just let the tears flow. "Welcome, my son." Ethan smiled. "I've been waiting for this moment my whole life." Sarah was there too. John and Samuel all hugged him. Emily and Brian welcomed him like a newfound uncle. Lily drew him a picture, a heart with the entire family's name on it. Ethan cried when he saw it. "I finally belong somewhere." During dinner, Margaret made a toast. "To all the children who arrived late, but not too late. Because God's timing is never late." Karen added, "And to all the mothers who were faithful, even when they didn't know the whole truth." Emotion filled the room. Even Ethan, newly arrived, already felt like a part of it all. Later that night, John and Ethan were talking in the backyard. John said, "If you had shown up sooner, I would have freaked out. But today, I understand. The truth doesn't come when we want it. It comes when we need it." Ethan nodded. "And the truth brought you guys to me." Samuel appeared with 3 cups of coffee. "We're brothers, and we're going to make this work." Margaret sat on the porch, gazing up at the sky. Karen was beside her. "Did you ever imagine this, Margaret?" The elderly woman smiled. "Not even in my wildest dreams. But God always goes beyond. He doesn't just fix things. He surprises." Karen squeezed her hand. "And turns every pain into testimony." Margaret took a deep breath. "Yes. And what a testimony." The following Sunday, everyone went to church together. The front row was packed. Margaret, surrounded by all her children, grandchildren, daughter-in-law, new adopted daughter, and the youngest unknown brother. The pastor invited them to the altar. "Evans family, come here." They stood. The church applauded. And Margaret took the microphone. "Dear brothers and sisters, I am a woman who has experienced betrayal, abandonment, lies, and loss. But I am also a woman who saw God rebuild her house with His own hands. Today, I don't just have children. I have living testimonies that faith never fails. The truth sets you free, and forgiveness heals." The church wept together. Karen recorded everything. She posted it on social media. Within days, the story went viral. Thousands of women left comments. "My story is similar. This lady taught me to forgive. I cried from beginning to end." Margaret was now a symbol of redemption for an entire generation. But she remained humble. It was God. Only God. Ethan decided to move to the city. Sarah and Lily did too. The family gathered every Sunday, now with more chairs at the table. Each scar became a reminder of how much they had overcome. And Margaret, sitting at the head of the table, always prayed before eating, "Lord, thank you for every pain and for every new beginning." On Margaret's 90th birthday, the house was packed. Everyone gathered. A banner read, "To the matriarch who taught us true love." She stood, Bible in hand, and read, Romans 8 verse 28, "All things work together for good to those who love God." She looked at everyone with teary eyes. Everything, even the pain. And there, in front of everyone, she smiled. A smile full of peace, of duty fulfilled. The woman who had been humiliated at a dinner party was now celebrated by a crowd. And what seemed like the end was only the beginning. Because, in the end, love always wins. And the most difficult stories are the ones that heal the most. If you've made it this far, take a deep breath. I know your heart is heavy, too, but full of hope. Because this story isn't just about Margaret. It's about all of us. About mothers who have been forgotten. About children who carry doubts. About families who have drifted apart out of pride. And about the power of forgiveness that changes everything. How many truths do you also have hidden inside, waiting for the right moment to surface? How many postponed conversations? How many silences that scream? Sometimes, life waits for us to have the courage to open the door, to hear the doorbell of truth ringing. And when we open it, it may hurt, but it can set us free. Have you ever felt left out, like Margaret? Have you ever carried your wounds in silence, with a smile on your face, pretending everything was fine? Or maybe you're like John, trying to understand who you really are amidst so many versions told by others. The truth is, all of us, at some point, have been someone in this story. But what matters is what you're going to do now. Will you continue carrying this pain alone? Will you let your pride win once again? Or will you seek reconciliation, even if it hurts? You don't have to wait a lifetime to do what you can do today. A phone call, a hug, an "I'm sorry," or even an "I love you." The Bible says that the truth will set you free, John 8 verse 32. And Margaret showed us this with her life. She taught us that faith isn't about not feeling pain. It's about choosing to keep going, even when you're feeling it. It's about turning scars into bridges. And about letting God write the ending that no one expected, but everyone needed. Now I ask you, have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you deeply? Is there a truth you need to face before it's too late? If it were you at that table, what would you do differently? Comment below. Tell me your story. Other women may be inspired by you. Let's create a chain of faith, truth, and healing. And if this story touched your heart in any way, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. This will help me continue sharing stories that build lives. And remember, even if all seems lost, God is still writing. Sometimes, the turning point comes when we least expect it. And sometimes, it starts when the doorbell rings.